Hey, it's the good folks at Comics for Fun and Profit reminding you that nobody Patreons like we Patreon. So join us at C4FAP and go over to Patreon/Comics Fun Profit and sign up at a level of your choosing. There's various tiers with various goodies for you. Something that everyone gets at any level is you get to be a part of our Slack channel community. And you get early and ad-free access to all our episodes. But wait, there's more. So go over to Patreon/Comics Fun Profit and check out all we have to offer. We urge you, sign up today.
Aloha! This is Jason from Hawaii. Welcome to a special edition of the Comics for Fun and Profit podcast. In this episode, I will be interviewing Eisner-nominated writer, editor, and podcaster Alisa Kwitney. She's here to promote her new Ahoy Comics magazine series called G.I.L.T. Now, two questions, Alisa. First off, did I pronounce your last name correctly?
Actually, it's Kwitney.
Kwitney.
I know everyone thinks it should be a QU, like a quit, but it's KW. So it is Kwitney.
All right. And the second question, how are you doing today?
I am having a completely insane day, but this is now, I've reached the point of relaxation and just being able to sit and talk with you, which is excellent.
No, thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much. Now, before we start getting into the questions and so forth, there's a couple things I would like to do. First off, I want to give a shout out to Hannah Bahedri of Superfan Promotions for setting up this interview. And Hannah, thank you very much for the advanced copy. Thank you very much. Again, Hannah, thank you very much for all your hard work. I'm going to ask, do you want to add anything to that?
Oh, no, Hannah Bahedri and David Hyde have been so amazing. Ahoy has just a great publicity team as well as a great editorial team.
Okay. Now, I'm also, before I start into questions, I want to give our listeners, that I got some of my information from Alisa's website, and it's AlisaWhitney.com. And also please check out Alisa's other interview that she did on another podcast, Fortress of Comic News podcast, and it just came out on March 30th, 2022. Now, Alisa, I want to go over your amazing history. You have an incredible history. Now, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. And I'm going to say, if I mispronounce your name, please correct me. It's okay. So now I know correct me if I'm wrong. Your first publishing work was when you were 8 years old. It was a book of poems published by the Teachers and Writers
Collaborative.
Okay. Now, your first real job was a newspaper reporter in Miami, where you did a series on sex and the elderly.
Okay, so this is funny. So I ended up getting a job at the Jewish Floridian, which was a tiny little, weekly paper. It was laid out old school by hand. It was really, almost Victorian in its sensibility. And, a lot of the pieces were either taken directly from AP or they were just little puff pieces about the Hadassah Sisterhood has a record-breaking, charity drive. And I kept coming out with all these ideas. And they, one of them was, no, it wasn't originally about sex in the elderly. I think I went to cover something. Mm-hmm. And then I just naturally ask a lot of questions. And someone mentioned, this was during the whole AIDS crisis, in the 80s. And someone mentioned no one ever thinks that the elderly are at risk, but actually there, is a lot of sexual activity in the nursing homes. Mm-hmm. And I just thought, well, that's the most interesting thing I've heard since I started working. Yeah. So I asked more questions, and that piece ended up being all about sex in the elderly. And the sales of the paper jumped by some enormous amount. They were like, Kwitney, this is your beat now, sex and the elderly. we're gonna set South Florida retirement communities by storm.
Now, for our listeners, because I'm going to remember Because I remember back in those times, yes, because all of a sudden, I think in the early 90s, it was like, there was this, and this was being taken seriously in the news, about not only the AIDS epidemic among elderly, but also sexually transmitted disease. It was all starting to come out, but if I remember correctly, yeah. Now,
Yeah, and I think prior to that, I think the older people who were no longer scared of getting pregnant kind of figured like, hey, this is great. We do not have to worry about condoms.
yeah,
So I'm allowed to say condoms.
yes,
Um,
and
so
feel free.
anyway,
You want to share it, don't worry.
so that was so that became my beat, was the sex, and I learned more about pre-Viagra sex things that would help with sexuality in older age
Yeah.
than probably any other 20 something
Mhm.
person in South Florida at that time. So yeah, it was a singular accomplishment.
Now, the thing is, no, for listeners, I mentioned this because to me, it kind of ties into a little bit ties into your series, a little bit.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Now, I'm sorry, if you don't mind, I'm going to continue on. Now, your master thesis became your first prose novel, titled "Till the Fat Lady Sings" from HarperCollins in 1992. The book
Mhm.
is a, the book is about a comedy of manners about college and eating disorder. Now, this made the New York Times new and noteworthy um, paperback list or something, right? Correct?
Yeah, it got a really great review in the Sunday Times book review too, and I was so young that it just felt like, oh, this great thing that happens whenever you publish a book. But I'm still waiting for it to happen again.
Now, also too. Now, I know you've written a number of novels. Some of your other novels include, now correct me, I'm just going to pick out just, one title is Corpse and Crown Harlequin Teen in 2018. Am I pronouncing the title correctly?
Yeah, so Corpse and Crown is actually the second in a duology. It's Cadaver and Queen and Corpse and Crown, and they each focus on a different main character, so you can read them apart. But they are about, I call them my Frankenstein meets Grey's Anatomy YA novels. And they're about a school that creates biomechanicals for Queen Victoria's army. It actually started life as a Vertigo proposal.
Uh-huh.
And I think at that point, whether it was the historical nature or whatever it was, it didn't quite work out as a graphic novel. But originally,
Mm-hmm.
Cadaver and Queen was going to be a graphic novel or series.
That sounds pretty cool. It does. Okay, and then you've also, you've done some work for DC, and we're going to get into that a little bit more. But you wrote Mystic You, that came out in 2018, and that was a 3-part miniseries focusing on a young Zatanna, and the art was done by Mike Norton. The artist of the creator of Battle Punk, correct?
Yes. So I think the first issue might have come out in 2017 and it concluded in 2018. It was originally, I think, was it 348 page standalone, and then it was collected. So this was it's funny, the series was supposed to come out earlier, like 2015, and
Mm-hmm.
then it didn't, and then it sort of got reinvented. But it's basically about Zatanna and a bunch of other magical DC characters going to a magical university, and instead of who will become the great hero, it's sort of who's going to become the Voldemort of the bunch.
Ah, okay. Because I'll be honest, when I saw that you wrote this and the artist Mike Norton, it's like, I gotta look this up. I have to check this out.
So I have to say, my favorite thing about that series is I got to create a character called Plop, which was sort of an ode to my love of the series Plop and to all of the gross, gloopy, drippy horror of the 70s in DC Comics.
I know what you mean. I'm sorry, I'm kind of going off the cuff here, and I'm going to try to make this real short. Swamp Thing, Len Wein, Bernie Wrightson. Oh, what was it? issue 2 or 3. I still remember it, with the Patchwork Man, and then you had that one creature with the hand and the head on. Oh my God!
I love, gross out
Yeah.
stuff. And my daughter at that point was in college, and she said it is so disgusting when you
Hmm.
go into the shower in this hall. It's just filled with all these weird sticky substances. And I found myself thinking like, oh,
Hmm.
that would be great for a horror comic. Because if you know how witches are supposed to keep their toenails and not let anyone have their hair cuttings, like what if all that effluvia, all your sweat and
Hmm.
spit and other things, was magic, and then it would be collecting in the drains and dripping down into the basement. And anyway, Mike Norton was absolutely great to work with, and it really, I think, came out beautifully.
Okay. All right. Let's still continue on. You also wrote The Sandman, King of Dreams, that came out in 2003. And correct me if I'm wrong, that was a nonfiction novel about the Sandman series that you worked on, correct?
A
Or yeah,
nonfiction book, yeah. So
yeah.
that was I worked with Neil,
Hmm.
and it was for Vertigo and another publisher. I also did let's see, Vertigo Visions, Art from the Cutting Edge of Comics. So these were, I was no longer working on staff as an editor, but they were
Hmm.
sort of editorial books in that I was going to the creators and working with Karen Berger or with Neil Gaiman, and coming up with, you know, a book to sort of be a companion
Hmm.
to the comics.
And also to, for our listeners, also to, Alisa has also written just recently Marvel's prose novel, Rogue Untouched, that came out last year. So you're
Yes, that was my pandemic puppy of a novel.
now, um, like mentioned, you have an amazing history. Now, like I say, you can correct me if I'm wrong in any part of this. You worked for the DC Vertical line um, for about 7 years. Roughly, was it from like 1992 to about the 2000s?
Yes, I'm trying to remember. So I left. It's hard to say exactly, because
Yeah.
that's roughly, because what happened is, when I had my second child,
Hmm.
I was still freelancing, and I figured, okay, between being the mom of young kids and wanting to write and wanting to edit, I didn't feel like I could keep all those things going at the
Hmm.
level I
Yes.
wanted. So I left my staff editing job, but I was always coming back. I was doing, the Vertigo Visions book. And
Hmm.
then when another editor, Stuart Moore, left, I came back for a little while, and I was
Yeah.
Stuart until there was another hire. So, for a long time, I just felt like I was gone, but not completely.
Yeah. So, and now during your time at when you're working at DC, you worked with Karen Berger, um, and Neil Gaiman. Now you worked as an assistant editor on the Sandman series. Then you became a full editor on the Dreaming and on the Lucifer series. Is that correct?
Well, Lucifer, it's kind of funny because I found Mike Carey as a slush pile, writer with, I can't remember what the project was. And I had started to work with him to put together Lucifer. I wanted him
Hmm.
for the writer of Lucifer, but I left before it was completely launched. So Shelley Bond, who was then Shelley Roberg, took over, and so she just did an amazing job, and I was thrilled with how everything turned out.
But I think the incredible thing is that you were there literally at the ground floor of Vertigo.
I was there at the basement because Vertigo,
Okay.
I was there before Vertigo was officially Vertigo.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, I was, I guess I came was I Tom Pyre was the assistant editor
Yes.
before me,
Hmm.
and it had been Art Young before him. So I was there pretty damn early on.
Hmm.
Am I allowed to say damn?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. And then I'm just going to wrap up. And then you also teach writing. You're an editor at is it
Liminal.
Comics
Yes,
at
I
Brian
did.
Mills Press. Okay.
Yes, I have not been able to do as much editing on that front as I have liked recently, but I did a wonderful book with Al Davison
Mhm.
and his creative partner, and I'm just having a momentary.
Oh,
Her first name is In, and I'm trying to remember. I'll have to look this up.
mhm.
Because my brain is a sieve and loses things. But yeah, so I love editing and I miss editing, but sometimes, especially with the pandemic, I haven't been able to do
Mhm.
everything is at the level at the rate I'd like to.
Mhm. Now, I'm going to ask, did I miss anything?
Um, I I can't think of anything right now. Oh, I mean, just I'm doing the Sandman podcast right now as well.
Right. Yeah.
So one of the things that I've been working on
Mhm.
is my friend Lani Diane Rich
Yes.
is just an incredible story writer and story expert,
Mhm.
and she's come out with a wonderful book on story and writing. So she has done other podcasts on Buffy and Good
Yes.
Omens. So we teamed up to do a podcast called Endless.
Mhm.
And it first of all, we're reading the Sandman comics. We've just concluded season of the Mists, and
Mhm.
then we're going to season of Mists. I can't talk or think right now. And then we're taking a little hiatus, and we're going to come back and start talking about the Netflix movies, the Netflix series when
Mhm.
it starts.
Oh, okay.
This is
Okay.
what happens when you get up at 5 a.m. to start preparing your taxes. It's just it's all pretty bad. What can I say?
um. Now, um. Let's see. One. I just want to, because now the podcast. Now, I know you guys have about 30 episodes right now. Um.
Oh dear God,
Up
do we? Yeah,
about 30.
just about. Yeah, I think. Yeah, because what it was like 20, 27 or 28 Sandman episodes, and I think
Mhm.
we and then we had a special Karen Berger interview that we did. And up
Yeah.
ahead, we'd like to do more interviews with people who were creatives on the series.
Okay. That's pretty cool. Because I'll be honest, listeners, preparing for this interview, I listened to the trailer. It's great. I was able to listen to part of the first episode. I just didn't have too much time, but it sounds great. You know, um, and I mean, if you guys are big Sandman fans, you, I think this is the perfect podcast because, again, like Alisa said, she was in the basement when all this started. She probably was hearing rumblings. So she was there.
And Neil keeps listening and correcting me or adding little tidbits when if I say on the air like I'm not sure about this, I get a little message afterwards. Oh, don't you remember?
Alisa has followed in her parents' footsteps. Her late father. I'm going to try to pronounce your father's name correctly. Robert Sheckley, is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, very good.
Yeah, he was a science fiction writer. He was nominated for Hugo and Nebula Awards, and in the mid '70s, he was the first fiction editor of Omni magazine. Now, to me, listeners, and I don't even know if Omni magazine still exists in any form today.
I think it exists in an online
Okay,
version, but people don't read as much physical objects
yeah.
anymore. So
And the thing is, to me, this magazine like really dealt with hard science fiction and science facts, you know. And then in 2001, uh, Mr. Sheckley, he was named. Now I'm going to try to pronounce this word correctly. Author emeritus by the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America.
Emeritus, yes, yeah, no, it was. He used to say, 1 minute you're a promising young talent, next you're a grand old, expert in something, and you don't feel any different.
Now, the reason why I'm bringing this up is, and bringing his name up is because, we, comic books and pop culture friends, we have seen his work in movies. His novel, The Game of X, that came out in 1965, was loosely adapted as the 1981 Disney film Condor Man. His other book, Immortality Inc., it came out in 1959, and that was, if I remember correctly, was his first novel, and that was loosely adapted into the movie Free Jack that came out in 1992. It starred Emilio Estevez, Mick Jagger, Rene Russo, and Anthony Hopkins.
Yes, and you missed one.
I'm sorry?
You missed one earlier one. So in the 60s, his short story, The Seventh Victim, became the movie, The 10th Victim, and then became a novel, The 10th Victim. And that was an Italian movie with Marcello Mastroianni and Ursula Andress. And she's wearing like that breast, like metal breast gun thing that fires, that gets made fun of in Austin Powers. So, and the whole soundtrack is very groovy 60s, like
yeah. Oh my God, I've got to check. Oh my God.
The story and the movie are very different, and I think that at the time, I think my parents were underwhelmed by the movie, but now it is just a piece of camp exquisiteness that just really needs to be seen and heard.
Oh, and then also to your mother, I'm hoping I pronounced your name correctly, Ziva?
Yeah, Ziva Kwitney.
Okay. She was a journalist and a writer. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Now, the only thing I could find on her is she wrote an introduction to a book called Frostbite, and it was photographs. She wrote the introduction in 1978.
She did other things too. She wrote a lot for Cosmopolitan magazine, and Ms. Magazine, like Hildy, the title character in G.I.L.T. And she also wrote she co-wrote the cover story to a New York Times Magazine article, and she was a collaborator on the Human Catalog of Sexual Consciousness. So in a lot of ways, she had a career that was similar to the career that Hildy has in the comic.
Oh, that is great. Were your parents very supportive of you becoming a writer and editor?
Well, yes. I mean, so my parents split, and my father moved to Europe. So I didn't have a lot of contact with him between, say, the ages of 7 and 14. But it just, writing and books were in the house. And so by the time I did get to know my father at 14, I think it would have been a really awkward meeting if we just were trying to connect as a father and a daughter. But instead, I was just really curious about books and writing. And that was really the only way my father knew how to communicate anyhow. So it was, in its way, it worked out, because we could talk about books and science fiction and humor. And that gave us, a lot of common ground. But my mom was very supportive, really taught me a lot about writing and about revision.
Oh, okay, that's great. Now, are any of your children interested in following your footsteps to be a writer or an editor?
I don't think so. My daughter is an environmentalist and a biologist, and my son is working in a lab on the it's like biometrics, which is the mathematical side of modeling. So they're in the science side of the science fiction.
Yeah. That is incredible. That's amazing. Okay, sorry.
But they're readers. They're readers.
Okay, well, that's good. Okay. So now, where can listeners follow you on social media?
Okay, so first of all, I on Twitter it's at a Kwitney. Facebook, I think it's Alisa Kwitney Sheckley, because I have written under both names.
Yes.
I have my website. On Instagram, I'm Kay Witty, but here's the embarrassing thing. I really haven't posted much on Instagram, but I've started to draw with Visual Arts Passage, because I've been teaching writing comics, and I thought I should learn to draw a little better. So the only thing on my Instagram page are these really bad drawings. I just posted last night, we were drawing Uhura and Spock, and it's so I'm going to be really embarrassed if a lot of people come on and look. I'm not a good artist, guys. I don't consider myself an artist at all, but I'm kind of displaying my art because that's part of what the assignment is when you draw on Thursday nights with Visual Arts Passage.
I'm sorry, I'm going a little off the cuff here. How big of a Star Trek fan are you?
I am a huge original Star Trek fan. It formed me. I did watch Next Generation. I'm not as up on the other stuff, but original Star Trek I was much more Star Trek than Star Wars.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So oh my God. I'm sorry. I'm kind of going off the cuff. Listeners, because before we started, I told, I sent Alisa my questions. She saw how much stuffs I had. I have to ask, I'm sorry. So did you get a chance to meet any of the original actors or get their autographs?
No, I mean, so here's the thing. My father, I think, tried to write for Star Trek and did not get something accepted. I did. Okay, so here's my weirdest experience. You have to remember, I didn't grow up with my dad. We weren't in contact. But when I was about 10, 11, I discovered the Twilight Zone, and I was watching it late at night. And my mom had already gone to sleep, and I'm watching, and there's some episode about a missing plane. There's a few of those. And I hear something, Mr. Sheckley. Now, Sheckley is not a name I've heard anywhere else. It's not like, there are names that, could be anyone.
Yes.
No one who's not related to my father that I've met has the name Sheckley. I freaked out. I felt like my little black and white TV was talking to me, and I ran. I shook my mom awake, and she said, "Oh yeah, okay. Look, that was a thing. Your dad was publishing so much and under pseudonyms that a bunch of science fiction writers used his name in things in order to try and flush him out. I don't understand exactly how that was supposed to work." Another story, and again, this is not something I experienced, is Vincent Price was doing a project with my father, and he called the house and he said, in his Vincent Price voice, "May I speak with Robert Sheckley?" I can't quite do the Vincent Price voice. And my mother said, "Oh, she thought it was her friend joking." So she hung up on him. And then Vincent Price called back and said, "I am not Ricky."
Oh my God. Oh.
Yeah.
That is so awesome.
Thank you.
That is so, because it's meeting these these movie stars in normal day situation. Vincent Price calling your house.
But again, I never spoke to Vincent Price. The closest I ever got to him was buying his cookbook and trying to make some of the dishes in it. So that's don't get too impressed with me.
No, but then now it's like whenever sci-fi is going to throw, do those Twilight Zone marathons, because I know about those missing airplane episodes, I'm going to really pay attention more.
Be on the lookout. There's a Sheckley one.
All right. I'm sorry. Okay. So you already started to talk about a little bit about your childhood. Where did you grow up?
I grew up on the Upper West Side in a pre-war building, Classic 6. My mom is not in the same apartment, but she's in the same building. And so I know a lot of the idiosyncrasies of these old buildings. And this was my playground in the 70s. Like it was looser and wilder. So instead of having a playroom and being supervised from a pretty young age, I was just allowed to go up on the roof and climb. So there were those water towers and various ladders that went up things. And it was just like, be careful. Go play on the roof.
Yeah.
And so that's part of what I wanted to get at in writing a comic that's set in this wonderful, magical, spooky building and going back to the 70s when things were wilder.
Oh, yeah. and because I mean, because I understand because I grew up in the 70s, and it was very common for latchkey kids, 7, 8 years old, go home, open, go home unsupervised, no adult supervision for 2-3 hours. Nobody calls child protective services on you, but times have changed now.
Yeah.
But yeah, but we grew up okay.
That's probably what people said in the Middle Ages. We didn't need any protection from plagues. The plague wiped out half my village, but I'm fine.
All right. What was or were your first comic or Sunday comic strips that you read?
Oh gosh. Okay. So I don't remember which the very first were. I was very young when I discovered horror comics, House of Mystery and House of Secrets, Midnight Tales, a lot of the Charlton ones, and I loved them really fiercely. Once I discovered horror, that was my top choice.
Mm-hmm.
But I would read everything. I read Archie comics. I read romance comics. I read superhero comics.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and my mom, I think when I was around 6, my mom found me Shanna the She-Devil, which was a Marvel comic. And she was this feminist jungle queen. Oh my God, I loved her so much.
Mm-hmm.
And that was only 5 or 6 issues. And then there was a limited run of the Cat, which was another Marvel feminist hero. She became Tigra. Yeah, I'm trying to think. So those were my early fierce loves, and I still have my issues.
Oh, that is so cool. That is so cool. I'm gonna ask, I know you, what about what, I know I can't remember which podcast, but I know you now types of novels you read were was it romance novels? Is that correct?
I read everything. You mean as a
Okay, great.
kid? I didn't start reading romance as a kid,
No,
but I
yeah.
was reading all of the books in my father's shelves. So a lot of science fiction, short stories from the 50s and 60s. What else was I reading? I was reading a lot, and in the old days there wasn't, people didn't pay as much attention to what kids read. So if I found something that looked interesting but was inappropriate, I read it.
Yeah.
And so I was reading a bunch of high and low. And when did I discovered romance, I think when I was about 12, because I was looking for comics, and my cousins in Florida had stopped reading comics and started reading Harlequins. And I said, this is terrible. This is a nightmare. What am I going to, because I also used to read incredibly quickly. So I would, I worked my way through everything I had and they used to have. And so that's when I started reading romance as well.
So I'm going off the cuff questions. Do you have a favorite science fiction writer?
Honestly, I love my father's writing. It was, I don't know how much it even was that he was my father, because there were other writers I loved too, but he was an absurdist and a humorist. And it just was very compelling for me. His stuff is incredibly philosophical and yet really, really accessible.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to continue on. So Drew, Comics for Fun and Profit, the co-host, submitted this question. What was your first comic shop?
My first comic shop was just the local stationery store, around the corner that sold candy and, cigarettes to the parents and to the kids when no one, I think I bought a pack there when I was 12 too.
It was, right?
It was,
sorry.
Anything. Yes. And there were chocolate cigarettes. And so those were my first, way of getting comics. And then comics disappeared. And I think I must at some point have said, where did all the comics go? And someone said comic book store. And there's one, I remember there was one, I think 86th Street, Amsterdam, somewhere around there in the city. And I remember going in, you went down some stairs, it was pretty dark. And I do remember a kid staring at me and saying like, there's a girl. So, but I didn't care, I don't know, the city was grittier and more interesting in those days. And there were also these, so there'd be a comic book store, there'd be a Santeria shop where you could go and buy, I was not, just because a shop didn't look like it was filled with people who looked like me did not dissuade me from going in and taking a look around.
All right. Now, we touched a little bit about, working in comics, but how did your journey started working in comics and writing novels? How did that happen?
Oh gosh. Well, I always intended to be a writer. And I think I was working at those little Jewish papers. I tried to see what the Miami Herald would say if I sent them my resume, and they said, no, thank you. At that point, I decided I was going to go back to school so I would kind of learn how to write a novel. And I attended Columbia University's fiction writing program. That was a 2-year master's program. And then I needed to get a job, because I was in my 20s. Most of my friends were already working at things. And so most people who in those days who were writing would often work as assistant editors at one of the big 5, the big publishing houses. So I tried out there, and I remember an editor saying, I'm gonna treat you hard, ride you hard and send you home wet, and you're gonna have no free time, and I'm not gonna pay you very well. And I thought, well, that sounds pretty lousy. So I was also reading genre. I was reading comics and I was reading romance. So I thought, you know what? Let me see what else in New York City I can apply to. So I applied to Silhouette and DC and Marvel, which were both in the city at that point.
Yes.
DC got back to me. And so I interviewed, and when they asked me what kind of comics do you like best, instead of lying, I said, honestly, my favorite comics, I don't think you put out anymore. I loved The House of Mystery and The House of Secrets.
Yeah.
And they said, oh, well, actually, you then should talk to Karen Berger. And at that point, of course, both with Swamp Thing and with Sandman, the characters Cain and Abel, who were the hosts of The House of Mystery and House of Secrets, were being repurposed and revisited for a more mature audience. So I ended up having a follow-up interview with Karen Berger. And I've told this story a lot of times. I don't know if people are sick of hearing it, but I went to interview and I thought it was going well. Karen was pregnant at the time. We went out for lunch and then we came back. And then just by the end of the interview, she suddenly started frowning at me and looking really unhappy. And I thought, crap, what have I done? And then I said, does your head hurt? And she said, yeah, I'm getting a headache. And I said, oh, and you're pregnant. And without thinking, I reached over the desk and started to massage her temples.
Yeah.
And as one does. And as I'm doing it, I'm thinking, this might not have been the right choice. But she decided it was okay. So I got the job. I don't recommend that this is something that people do routinely. But it worked for me.
Now, I have not heard that story.
Oh, good.
Yeah. All right. Now, in one of your interviews, you mentioned that, and you mentioned previously that you worked with, or earlier in, that you worked with Tom Pyre. You guys shared an office together, correct?
We shared an office, and we moved a number of times in those early years. And somehow, I don't know, we were both smokers. It was still allowed to smoke indoors. And we were given an office that was ventilated as if it was a room full of computers. I don't know what happened to the actual room full of computers, but we could smoke as much as we liked. And it was absolutely, everything was blown out. It was lovely. It was probably like the best COVID office as well. You'd go in there and every germ would be blasted out of there.
Now, I'm joking on this part. Back then, did you or Tom, did you guys bum smokes off of each other? Like, hey, Tom, I'm out. You got at least one or two I could to get me through the day.
Oh, I think probably I may have bumped one off of him. I think he always had cigarettes in those days.
All right. So now we're going to talk about your series Guilt. Now, for our listeners, can you tell the listeners what is the story about and how did you come up with the story?
Oh gosh. So it is about two time traveling women. One is in her 70s and she's a raunchy old broad, living on a steady diet of, cigarettes and regret. And she is in a rather spooky building. I used to say this is Sex and the City meets the Golden Girls by way of the Twilight Zone. Now I've begun to say it's like Rosemary's Baby. If instead of focusing on Rosemary and the baby, Ruth Gordon, the little old witch, was a star, and the co-star was, I don't know if anyone remembers, she has this neighbor, Lara Louise, who's kind of twitchy and middle-aged. Go rewatch, or Rosemary's Baby. You'll know what I'm talking about. So anyway, so Hildy is this woman. She used to be a journalist. She used to be a Carrie Bradshaw type, sexy journalist in the 70s. And she has this big regret. So this is really her last chance to go back and change something she very much regrets. But she is beginning to be forgetful, and her nephew has arranged for her to have a home health care aide whom she does not want. And that's Trista. Trista belongs to the Bill Murray School of Employment. Do as little as is humanly possible and get your paycheck and go home. So Trista really is not eager to, well, the only thing that Trista cares about besides her paycheck is really not wanting to go back. She's not someone who wants to relive her past. I think for a lot of people, being a kid is as awful as being old, and that you don't have agency or control, and maybe it wasn't, the most perfect childhood. But when Hildy goes out through her back door, which is the fire door in a lot of old New York buildings, it's a time portal. And she winds up breaking the rules by having Trista, because Trista's trying to stop her. They end up going back through time together.
Yes.
And now they are in 1973. Hildy is in her mid-30s and Trista's 9.
It's like I said, I'm, as much, and I told you this already, is I'm not going to try to spoil it for the listeners because I love the rules that you set for time traveling, because I'm going to be, and now the only thing I know about parameters of time traveling is, of course, Back to the Future and all the time traveling movies, but I never thought, but I never seen it when people go back in time, it's, hey, I'm 30 years old again, or I'm,
which is the way we all want to travel back in time. I mean, when I say to myself, I'd like to go back to, the 90s, part of it is wanting to be the age I was then and having those experiences. And if I want to redo something, it's not like you want to go back in time and be just watching your younger self go through things. You want to be able to be that younger self. So Tom Pyre was wonderful. I mean, I knew what I wanted to write, but sometimes I would get bogged down. He just kept saying, write the story you want to write, make the rules follow what, the story that you want to write. And so I thought about it this way. When you go on vacation and you go to some resort and you're nervous, you're stressed out, so many things on your mind. You're like, if I could just sit on a beach chair by a pool, by the beach, I would let go of all my worries. And instead, you begin to bring all your anxiety to the vacation. You're like, God, I want to be this close. Why did these people set up their blanket so close to mine? How are we going to get from here? And if you don't control this, you bring your whole set of anxieties, except now all you're worried about are the things at the beach. And I thought you have this fantasy that the past was a simpler time. And if you could go back and be 9 or be in your 30s again, everything would be simpler and better. But no, the longer you are in the past, the
Mm-hmm.
more the past takes over, and it's hard to change because you're now being shaped by the hormones and the circumstances of the past.
Ah.
So that's the time travel conundrum in my universe.
Like I said, it sounds great. It really does. Um, let's see.
Thank you so much. We should talk about the artist too, because I
Yes,
realize this is an
yes,
audio
yeah.
format, and so people can't see the art. But Alain Morissette, Alain, so I always say this. Morissette is his like official artist name, and
Mm-hmm.
Alain is his real first name, which I think of him as. He is just an incredible artist. We were paired together 7 years ago for the original incarnation of Mystic You. So many things happened. DC was moving out, west at that point,
Mm-hmm.
and after that, like we didn't end up doing that together. And every time we tried to work together, one or the other of us got another, gig. But we did a Snifter of Terror, Edgar Allan Poe story, a
Oh,
really
okay.
wonderfully disgusting tooth story. And we just kept talking and hanging out online all through the pandemic. And finally, this project has been years in the making, in the
Mm-hmm.
sense that we've just wanted to work together, and we are incredibly collaborative. So even though the initial idea of this was mine, our process is very back and forth, and we
Mm-hmm.
feed off of each other's enthusiasm and
Mm-hmm.
fun. And his art is just, he can do emotionally authentic, and
Mm-hmm.
he can do like gross drippy horror, and he can do humor. He's just amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to give a big shout out to him.
Oh no, yes. And then we talked a little bit before we started recording was in Hildy's apartment. Like I mentioned that there's stacks of stuff around Hildy's apartment. It's and I could see clearly on one of the stacks of her, I guess her notes or articles is, and if you guys, listeners, if you guys pick up the issue, it's you can read what's on the post-it, and it said, "Do not marry this man." And I was like, "Wow, that's really clear," and it stood out.
Well, I wanted, Alan, I do drive him a little crazy. That there are a lot of visuals. I love rich backgrounds, and I think that that's a lot of what my pleasure is as a comic book reader. I really want to see a lot of detail, and I want it to contribute to the story.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big fan of Billy Wilder, who did Some Like It Hot and The
Mm-hmm.
Apartment, and he in turn was mentored by Ernst Lubitsch. And Billy Wilder talks about the Lubitsch touch, which is these wonderful, economical, nifty ways of telling story through the visuals. And I'm not saying I'm great at that. I'm just saying I aspire to it in
Mm-hmm.
comics all the time.
Oh, but you're Mara said, am I pronouncing his name
Yeah,
correctly?
yeah.
I mean, he did it well with, like I said, when I'm looking at the panel, it's like that's pretty clear what's written on the post-it, and
Yes.
and he does it according to the size. It's not he does it according to the size of the folder that it's on. But I can still read what's clearly on there, and I know
He has,
like some parts.
he's, yeah, I mean, he's put not just that, but there's so many delicious touches that he has included. It's just, hopefully our goal was that each comic should be read at least twice,
Mhm,
because comics are expensive, and if it's the kind of thing where you read it once, you're like, I'm done,
mhm,
then maybe you don't feel like you've gotten your money's worth. But if there are all these great things that you might miss on the first pass, and you reread, and then you pick up more, I
mhm.
think it feels like, oh, money well spent.
Now, also too, I know you already started to, you, um, one of the key, I guess, like quote unquote, maybe characters in the story is Hildy's building, right? Kind of
Yeah,
plays a
yeah.
role in the story. So, may I ask, can you tell the listeners about how did you come up with this building? Um, is this an actual building? And I know there's a couple
It's
you gotta
based on
tell.
an actual building. So I started out just thinking, everyone's I'm a huge Rosemary's Baby fan, by the way. I read and reread the book. I love the movie. But I was thinking the Dakota's been used and used. I wonder if there is another cool building, ideally on the Upper West Side, because that's where I'm from, that has a background.
Mhm,
And so I just started to look it up, and I discovered the Level Club,
mhm,
which was built by theosophists according to the blueprint of King Solomon's Temple. And this was just before the pandemic. So I
mhm,
strolled on over to it and went inside, and even got invited to see an apartment. But New York City is filled with stuff that is wonderful and strange, and always being in danger of being demolished,
mhm,
because unlike the English, Americans just really don't preserve the past very
mhm.
well.
And then your artist, now correct me if I'm wrong, pretty much what you know now he basically drew the picture from, was it from pictures that you sent him? And is the building almost accurately correct in the?
I think he's improved on it. I don't think
Okay.
there's really gargoyles, because King Solomon's temple
Yeah,
wouldn't have
oh,
had gargoyles, and I wanted a little more spookiness there.
yeah,
But so it's artistic license, but
oh yeah,
it's certainly in the DNA.
yeah. Because the other thing too with the because when I read the story, the building looks, because it does it it's it looks very nice on the outside. You go into the lobby, it's very well lit. And then,
Yeah, that's based on the real Level Club.
so you mentioned that you got invited to take pictures of someone's apartment. Can you tell that story?
Yeah, so I walked in there and said to the doorman, "Hey, I'm a writer and I'm writing. Can I come in and take some pictures?" And he said yes. And then someone walked by with a stroller, and I said, "Oh, this is a great building. I'm, using it as the basis for something I'm writing." And she invited me to look at her apartment. I didn't in the end use her apartment, but it was amazing. And it was right before the pandemic. So it
Mhm.
felt like the last hurrah of a world where someone would casually invite a stranger in to breathe their air.
Now I'm gonna ask, because in this issue, you know, um, when Trista goes to Hildy's apartment, you have a young mother with her stroller.
Yes. Um, she's not actually based on the very sweet woman who let me see her apartment, because you know you need some forces of antagonism. And so I often find in New York City you can see this weird battle on buses between the elderly and people with strollers, and so
Oh,
I just thought I would take advantage of that.
okay. Um, Couple more questions before before I start wrapping things up. Um, and I think you kind of mentioned this already, but I'm just, you gotta refresh my memory. Can I ask you, why did you pick 1973? Is that an important year for you?
I wanted it to be the early 70s. The early 70s are actually part of the 60s, what we think of as the 60s.
Yeah.
So when we think about what the 60s are, we're actually thinking of sort of 1965, I would say, to 1975.
Yes. Yeah.
And after that, it starts to be more disco and glitz. But the early 60s look more like the 50s. And the late, so I wanted it to be part of that time.
Mm-hmm.
And I also, we set the contemporary part is in 2013, because we just wanted it to be 40 years in the past. Like you
Mm-hmm.
walk and it's 40 years in the past.
Yeah. Oh,
I
okay.
don't know why it works that way. That's the way it works.
No, okay. And then I'm going to ask this question. Now, I notice on the cover, the title is, G.I.L.T is spelled G, it's an acronym basically.
Yes.
And then we've already talked about this, but, you know, um, basically you revealed what it is in the first
Yes,
issue, right?
you have to pay attention. In the first issue, it is revealed. Although I don't say this, but it could also stand for grandmothers I'd like to tap. So you can take your but there's another explanation that's more occultish that's provided in the comic.
Okay, all right. Um, now, before I start wrapping up, I know you gave a shout out to your artist. Do you want to give any other shout outs to anyone on the creative team?
You know, it's actually Alan, you know, he was doing just about everything. I mean, he did the colors as well. So we've got a great letterer, and I'm having a brain moment of not remembering the name. Oh gosh, I'm so sorry. But
No, I'm sorry too, because I didn't put that in your note, because normally I'll do that. But anyway, okay.
I'll have to, I'm sorry, I'll look that up. But Tom Pyre has been the most wonderful editor, and I mean, honestly, I really do love working with Ahoy.
Mhm,
They've been, you know, very caring in terms of making things work for Alana and myself as a creative team, and
mhm,
you know, really getting behind the book. So, and you know, they're just fun to talk to because
mhm.
I like them.
Now, okay, so the last question on Guilt before I start wrapping things up. Who came up with the letter page?
That is the very brilliant Tom Pyre. I think. I think unless there are actual letters, perhaps.
Well, if there were actual letters, because I have to now, I mean,
I'm
like
sure they're
I
actual
read,
letters, but
yeah,
you know, Tom is old school, and you know, of course, a comic has to have a letters page.
yes.
So I again, you know, it's comics being made by people who love comics,
Mhm.
not just seeing them as like a feeder for TV or movies. This is comics for people who love comics.
Yeah. Because, like I said, listeners, you guys have to please buy this issue. I've read it; it's great. I love the letter page. Because if this is an actual letter, because you've seen my notes, because if this is an actual letter, especially from um, Debbie Wilhelm, a mom. This is a mom who has quote unquote read this mature comic to her little girl.
Yeah, who can say? Who can say?
Yeah.
I feel it would, you know, in the 70s, I'm sure it would have been.
Oh yes, yeah. And then now, because also that letter, I noticed that letter, well, that quote unquote letter was from Banff, Alberta, and I know Gastown, Vancouver was also mentioned in the first issue. So do you love, have you been to Canada? And
I've been to Banff actually, and it's amazing. And when I was there, they had like a moose walking through the town. It's a very cool place.
that is so cool. Yeah, it's a very beautiful place. It is. It really is.
Well, so is Hawaii. I've never been to Hawaii, and I've got to say, I am that it's on my bucket list.
Hmm. Okay. All right. Let's see. I'm gonna start wrapping things up. So, um, I now on your website, I saw a couple pictures of a Jeremy Renner Hawkeye figure. Do you collect action figures?
I do. You know, it's really funny. I don't think I have the Hawkeye one anymore. I think I got ticked off at something Jeremy Renner said in an interview. And I'm not like a perfectionist about these things. And also like I really loved, I had done a Marvel Avengers book that was based on the Brian Bendis story, but I changed things around so I could have Black Widow and Hawkeye, you know, this was right after the first movie, and I wanted to continue their relationship.
Hmm.
And the movies, of course, went in a very different direction. And as a romance reader, I was pretty disappointed. And in
Mm,
the end, I was like, I guess I don't have to keep my Hawkeye doll. But I do. I've got, let's see, I've got a Bride of Frankenstein. I've got Endora. I've got Rogue and Gambit because they were in my last book.
hmm.
I've got a lot of Planet of the Apes, which is a big
Yes.
fandom of mine. The original Planet of the Apes.
Yes. Ah, okay.
Oh,
Um.
and I have, wait a second.
Oh, yes.
I
You're
have
getting.
a Terry Moore action figure. This is yeah, this is Kachu from Strangers in Paradise.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so anyway, I
Ah,
think it's sorry not coming across very well. Do I have anything else here that's, I have a Supergirl,
ah.
a Darwin Cook Supergirl. So
Mhm.
yeah, I have stuff. I love toys. It was part of the best part about working at DC Comics is everyone had toys.
That's great. Let's see. I'm slowly wrapping things up, guys. Now, I also saw that one of your hobbies is improv.
Yeah.
When did you start doing that?
Oh, I took a couple of lessons as a teenager. My mom was friends with George Morrison, who was an acting teacher, and he actually Gene Hackman thanked him when he got the Oscars. So I did a class with him, and then nothing for ages, and then I started to take some improv locally with Samantha Jones up here in the Hudson Valley where I live. And it's wonderful. It's a great way to collaborate and get
Mhm.
story going and not, not edit yourself, just, sort of
Yes.
let yourself be creative and create.
Yeah. Let's see. I'm. This is an off-the-cuff question. Since the pandemic is slowly winding down or something, is there any plans for you to go back to do any improv or anything if there's time allotted?
Oh, that is an interesting question. I was part of a group called Uncle Cannibal. We did disband because it was all on Zoom, and I wasn't really what I was interested in doing in terms of improv. Now that things are back in person, I think eventually I'd like to make my way back to it. Although right now I'm so busy writing that
Yeah.
I don't have as much time
Yeah.
to do improv. But yeah, I'd like to do it again. It's fun. It's fun to play.
Yeah. Okay. Now, what is the most fun or exciting thing you love working in comics?
Oh God. The most fun thing for me is the collaboration with the artist
Hmm.
and being able to throw something back and forth and then, see the pages coming in. It was what I loved when I was on staff, where you'd read a script and then you get to see these pages come in, and it felt like magic.
Hmm.
It's so that's still my favorite part.
Hmm. Okay. Do you have a favorite convention moment, whether it's either as a fan or a creator?
My favorite convention moment is when I was an assistant editor. I went to San Diego early days, and I went with Bill Cobe, who is an artist who was working on for me on a project. And he said, "There's a bonfire with all these artists by the beach. Do you want to go?" So I said, "Yeah," and we went. And I just remember as we're standing on the other side of this big bonfire, I hear one of the artists yell out, "Bill, you sold out to the man." And then they take in that he's with me. And, we were both in our 20s then. They said, "Who's the girl?" And I yelled back, "I'm the man." And after that, the guy came over who'd been yelling and said, "Would you like to look at my portfolio?" So that's my favorite convention moment.
um, do you have any convention or store signing appearances lined up in the next few months or anything?
Oh gosh, I think right at the moment, I think things are going to be virtual. I'm going to be doing something with Mega Brain Comics. Either it's next week. Yeah, I think it's Mega Brain Comics next week. I'm doing something with Paragraph New York. All of these things are going to be virtual, so people can join in from wherever they are. And if you want to see me in person, come to the Hudson River Valley and find the muddiest, doggiest walk you can. I'll probably be there, pulled along or running after my dog.
All right. Any closing words to our listeners?
Oh gosh. Please read the comic and write me letters. I want letters for the letter column. Write me your strange, give me your strange, your bizarre, your letters. I would love that.
So listeners, before I start wrapping things up, I encourage you guys, please pick up, Guilt. Guilt #1 is going to be out in stores, I believe, on April 6th, the first issue.
That's right.
And again, if and of course, depending on when you listen to this, it'll probably be out in stores or pick it up in a trade format. It's great. The first issue is very good. I love it. You're gonna laugh out loud at stuff, and you'd be going, "Oh, should I be laughing at that?" Alisa, I wish you all the success with your, with your new comic series, Guilt, and your podcast, you know. And mahalo, thank you in Hawaiian. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to interview. Thank you very much.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me on the show. And I hope to see you someday in Hawaii.
I also want to thank Hannah of Superfan Promotions for help setting up this interview and the advanced copy. So Hannah, thank you very much. Now, if you are a new comic book reader or a lifelong comic book reader, please check out Guilt by Ahoy Comics Magazine. Like I said, I love this issue. If you do pick up a copy, please check out those short stories like Return of the Humans by Maggie Dancer and The Leveler by Ryan Rowe, because Ahoy Comics, one of the good things about them is that they add these little short stories or these nice little fake ads, which is pretty cool. Or like I think in My Bad, they added like a Mad Lib page, which was great. I think that was great. So, and also, I also want to thank Drew, the host of Comics for Fun and Profit, for putting this episode together. Drew, thank you very much for all your hard work behind the scenes. And if you are a new listener, please check out new episodes of Comics for Fun and Profit that comes out every Saturday. And I want to thank you, the listeners. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for listening to this episode. Until next time, guys, aloha.
Our LCS is Cowabunga Comics out of Oconomowoc, Wisconsin, and their mail order company, Deep Discount Comics. And we went there, and we were actually invoice number 00001. We were the very first their very first customer, which was kind of cool. They've been nothing short of fantastic, customer service wise. Discounts, they were very close, if not the same or better than DCBS on a lot of things. Over and above, customer service wise, always taking care of us, going the extra mile. So responsive, getting instantaneous responses back to questions about things, and to the point where knowing the stuff you like and anticipating your needs and having it suggested that you might want to add this to your order already before you even have to think about it. That's kind of cool. Really quality experience. So we love working with Cowabunga and Deep Discount, and that's why they're in our show notes every single episode and have been for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of episodes. That we leave them there because we like them. They're cool, good people. That's why they're in there. By God, they'd tell you to, if you've got a local comic book shop that you love, stay with them, because everybody needs to support their local comic shops. But if you're looking, check them out. You can check them out in the show notes. There's plenty of ways to get a hold of them. Either get on their list, just so you can check and see what kind of FOC and pre-order stuff they have and the discounts, and they'll send it to you each month, get you on that email list. And you can check out their shop, because they have a great shop of exclusive Cowabunga variants. Amazing stuff. Yes, they've always been there for us, and we take them for granted. So there you go. Now you know.